October 28, 2024, 340 miles north of Scoresby Sound, Greenland. The Norwegian P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft designated Norse 41 had been on station for 4 hours. The crew of 9 was running a standard Arctic surveillance grid, overlapping legs designed to cover the sea approaches between Iceland and the East Greenland coast, the same grid flown hundreds of times before by aircrew based at Andøya Air Station. Outside the aircraft windows, the world was dark and featureless and white, sea ice stretching to the horizon in every direction, temperature at altitude, -31°C. Below, the ice pack had locked the ocean into its winter stillness weeks earlier. The sensor operator, a lieutenant commander whose name has not been made public, was monitoring the forward-looking infrared display when the anomaly appeared. A polynya. An irregular oval of open water roughly 400 meters at its widest point, sitting in sea ice that the Norwegian Meteorological Institute would later confirm had been frozen solid, or should have been frozen solid, for at least 6 weeks. The polynya glowed on the infrared display against the surrounding ice, warmer water exposed to the Arctic sky, radiating heat upward into the darkness. No current pattern in any oceanographic model explained it. No underwater volcanic activity had been recorded in that section of the Greenland Sea. It had no business being there. And sitting in the middle of it, fully surfaced, with its running lights dark and its massive hull cold black against the warmer water, was the largest operational submarine on the planet. K-329 Belgorod. The sensor operator called it immediately. The aircraft commander brought the P-8 into a tighter orbit and activated the full suite of collection systems. Acoustic sensors locked onto the hull. High-resolution optical imaging began recording. Every monitoring system the aircraft carried was focused on the contact below. The contact was not moving. No propulsion noise, no ballast cycling, no communications burst on any monitored frequency. A vessel of that displacement, surfaced in open water, should have been producing a continuous stream of detectable acoustic and electromagnetic output. It was not. It was not transmitting on any monitored radio frequency, not radiating active sonar. Not doing anything a submarine does when it surfaces in a monitored maritime zone and knows it has been detected. It was simply there, sitting in a polynya that should not have existed, at 80 degrees north latitude, 340 miles above one of the most isolated coastlines on Earth. Within 45 minutes, a flash report had moved from Norse 41 to Andøya to the Norwegian Joint Headquarters in Bodø to Allied Command Operations in Mons, Belgium, and from there, within the hour, to the relevant watch centers at the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Nobody had expected this. The next 19 hours would give the Norwegian crew something that had never appeared in any prior NATO surveillance record. When it was over, when both vessels finally submerged together and the polynya began to seal itself back over, the questions left behind were serious enough to redirect an American attack submarine from a scheduled Mediterranean deployment and produce a closed-door Senate briefing that 3 sitting senators would describe in public as among the most disturbing they had attended in their careers on the Armed Services Committee. This is the story of what the Norwegians saw. And it is the story of one specific number, a temperature measurement, 4 degrees, that changed the interpretation of everything they recorded from a routine intelligence collection into a strategic alarm. To understand why the Belgorod's presence at 80 degrees north was alarming, before anyone even saw what else was in that polynya, you need to understand what this submarine actually is. Not in broad terms, in the specific ones. The K-329 Belgorod began her operational life as a keel laid in 1992 at the Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk on the White Sea. The original design was an Oscar II guided missile submarine, a follow-on to the vessels that formed the backbone of Soviet anti-carrier strike capability in the late Cold War era, a class built to hunt American carrier groups and put cruise missiles into their flight decks. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. Funding vanished. The unfinished hull sat in the yard under tarps for 23 years, rusting at the edges, a ghost of a program that the country that ordered it no longer existed to complete. Russia made a decision in 2012 not to finish the Oscar II, to use the hull as a foundation for something that had never been built before. Work resumed at Sevmash. A new 30-meter section was inserted into the original Oscar II hull amidships, extending the overall length to 184 meters and the submerged displacement to approximately 30,000 tons, making her, when commissioned, the longest submarine in current operation in any navy on Earth. The modification created an internal space for 6 massive silos arranged in a 2x3 configuration, positioned where Oscar II variants would normally carry P-700 Granite cruise missiles. These silos were not built for cruise missiles. They were designed for the two M39 Poseidon. Known in NATO circles by the reporting name Canyon and registered in American nuclear posture documentation as a strategic destabilizing system with no current defensive countermeasure, the Poseidon is not a torpedo in any conventional definition. It is an autonomous, nuclear-powered underwater vehicle, self-guided, capable of crossing ocean basins at depths that place it below the effective engagement envelope of most anti-submarine weapons currently in service. Capable of speeds estimated between 65 and 100 knots depending on depth profile. It does not aim at a ship. It aims at a coastline. The warhead yield assessed in American nuclear posture reviews is in the range of 2 megatons, a figure calibrated not to destroy a military target, but to generate a radioactive tsunami wave of sufficient size to contaminate and inundate coastal cities for months following detonation. The Belgorod carries 6 of them. She was commissioned into service in July 2022 at a ceremony attended by Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov, Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Navy, at Severodvinsk. She was subsequently assigned to the Undersea Research Directorate, the element within the Russian Navy responsible for special operations, seabed infrastructure activities, and the deployment of what Western intelligence communities collectively call special-purpose submarines. Her base is Olenya Bay on the Kola Peninsula, the same facility housing Russia's deep-diving nuclear research vessels, including the Losharik class and the test submarine Sarov. When the Belgorod moves, it generates intelligence reporting at the highest standing priority. When she goes dark, when her emissions footprint disappears and her last known position ceases to update, automatic flags go up at DIA, at NSA, and at Submarine Forces Atlantic. Because a Belgorod whose position is unknown is not treated as a submarine at unknown position. It is treated as a strategic nuclear asset at unknown position. The analytical posture is different, more urgent, more senior. On October 28, 2024, she was at unknown position north of Scoresby Sound. Nobody at any of those watch centers had tracked her leaving Olenya Bay. No acoustic contact had been logged during a transit that should have taken her through some of the most intensively monitored ocean in the world. The Norwegian Sea, past the Bear Island Passage, north through the Fram Strait between Svalbard and northeastern Greenland. She had made that entire transit invisibly, and she had done it to arrive at a polynya that could not have formed naturally, which meant someone had known this polynya would be here, which meant the Belgorod had not come to survey the Arctic. It had come to keep an appointment. The crew of Norse 41 held their orbit at 6,000 feet and kept recording. The Belgorod remained motionless in the polynya, surfaced, silent. For 2 hours, nothing about the picture changed except the growing data volume in the P-8's collection systems. Then the second shape appeared. It emerged from below the Belgorod's midships section. Not from outside, from below, rising through the water of the polynya as if it had been riding beneath the larger submarine throughout the transit north, docked to the Belgorod's belly in a configuration that would require specialized equipment not visible in any public technical illustration of the Belgorod's hull. The shape broke the surface slowly and then stopped, partially surfaced. roughly 25 to 30 meters in length, considerably narrower than the Belgorod's beam, with a different silhouette on the infrared display. Colder on its exterior surfaces than the Belgorod, not dramatically colder, measurably colder, as if it had been running with minimal thermal output for an extended period, managing its heat signature against the surrounding water. The acoustic package on the P-8 was running continuously. What it recorded from the second hull is what elevated this contact, immediately, from a surveillance priority to a crisis-level intelligence event. NATO's acoustic intelligence library for Russian special-purpose submarines is extensive. It contains acoustic profiles for every known Russian submarine class and for many individual hulls. It contains the signatures of vessels that Russia has never officially acknowledged. It contains modified profiles for hulls that have undergone acoustic quieting upgrades. The library is the accumulated product of decades of collection, analysis, and the kind of painstaking technical work that does not make it into press releases. The second hull's acoustic signature did not match anything in that library, not approximately, not as a modified derivative of a known platform. The spectral analysis of the acoustic output, run against the complete collection, produced no match above any threshold that analysts treat as meaningful. It was either an entirely new vessel whose existence had escaped prior collection, which would itself represent a significant intelligence failure, or a known vessel that had undergone acoustic modification so fundamental that it no longer resembled its own baseline profile in any frequency band the library used for comparison. Both possibilities were disturbing. A vessel that does not exist in NATO's acoustic library, operating from the world's largest special mission submarine, in a polynya that formed where the oceanography says no polynya should form, at 80 degrees north latitude. The Belgorod had come to the Arctic to meet something that nobody knew existed. And then the people appeared on the ice. At 0141 local time, Norse 41 reached minimum fuel reserve. The aircraft commander had already held station 2 hours beyond the patrol's planned duration. A second P-8, Norse 43, had been scrambled from Andoya and was 40 minutes out. The commander made the call. Break off now. Brief Norse 43 on the contact picture. Maintain coverage continuity as well as the handoff timing allowed. There was a 47-minute gap in coverage. When Norse 43 arrived on station and reacquired the contact, two things had changed. First, the second smaller hull had moved. It was no longer positioned alongside the Belgorod's midships section. It was now sitting approximately 120 meters ahead of the larger submarine's bow, separated from the Belgorod and positioned independently in the polynya, as if it had transited that distance under its own power during the 47 minutes that no Norwegian aircraft was on station. Moving a 30-meter submarine hull through near-freezing Arctic water over 120 meters in 47 minutes requires powered transit. Powered transit generates acoustic signature, propulsion cavitation, machinery noise. Norse 43 was running its acoustic collection system from the moment it acquired the contact. There was no residual cavitation signature, no machinery noise consistent with recent maneuvering. The second hull had covered 120 meters in darkness, in water cold enough to cause fatal hypothermia in minutes, and left no detectable acoustic trace of the movement. Second, there were people on the ice. Two figures in orange Arctic survival suits, visible on the FLIR system as small, bright shapes against the vast, cold flatness of the ice field. They were on the sea ice surface directly above the repositioned second hull, not standing still, moving, methodical, precise. The movements of people who had rehearsed the procedure multiple times, working deliberately around a roughly circular area on the ice surface, handling equipment that the FLIR system could not clearly resolve, but that one sensor operator described in his formal report as consistent with a long, flexible cable or a combined sensor and data transfer boom. I spent time going through what is publicly available about Russian Arctic emergency egress equipment and personnel delivery systems for special mission submarine classes, and one question kept surfacing in the documentation. How do two people arrive on sea ice 340 miles north of Scoresby Sound, with no helicopter, no surface vessel, no ice camp, and no evidence in the infrared imagery of any structure providing shelter or thermal protection? The standard personnel access hatch on an Oscar-derived submarine hull is not designed for direct ice surface access. You do not step out of a pressure hull and onto Arctic sea ice the way you step off a boat onto a dock. You need specialized access equipment, a dry lock shelter, a dedicated ice access airlock, or a pressurized ascent system designed to deliver personnel to a frozen surface from below. The Belgorod does not appear in any open source or publicly leaked technical documentation as being fitted with standard commercial ice surface access systems, which means either the Belgorod carries equipment of that kind that has never appeared in any available technical source, or the two people came from the second hull, the vessel specifically positioned below the ice from which they emerged. If it is the second option, the second hull was not a weapons platform in the mode that NATO's assessments had assumed. It was an operations platform, designed to navigate to a position, maintain that position on the Arctic seabed, and when directed, deliver personnel to the ice surface to conduct work that required human hands and direct physical contact with something above the hull. That is a more sophisticated capability than anything in the formal threat assessments. The temperature on the surface, with effective wind chill, was somewhere near -50°C. The standard cold weather survival suits rated for Arctic surface operations have a functional exposure limit of approximately 3 hours under those conditions. 3 hours is not a comfortable margin. It is the margin of last resort. The two figures remained on the ice for 3 hours and 14 minutes. Whatever they were doing required 3 hours in conditions that should have been unsurvivable without shelter. The Norwegian crew of Norse 43 documented all of it. Every minute of those 3 hours, the figures moving on the ice, the equipment they appeared to be handling. The second hull, partially surfaced, stationary, positioned directly below them. The Belgorod, further back in the polynya, also stationary, showing no detectable communications activity on any monitored frequency. When analysts reviewed the footage, the question they focused on was not what the people were doing. It was what their presence on the ice told them about the operational logic of the entire encounter. You test a system to confirm it works. You deploy personnel onto Arctic sea ice at -50°C for 3 hours, when you cannot avoid it, when something physical needs to happen that cannot be accomplished remotely, a data transfer that requires a physical interface, a component that needs to be replaced, a piece of equipment that needs to be disconnected from something and loaded back into the submarine by hand. The analyst's working term for what the orange-suited figures were doing is the term that appeared in the Senate subcommittee briefing in March. Retrieval. Not a test run, not a system check. A collection operation. Something was on the ice, or immediately below the ice, and the Belgorod had come to get it. What do you think was worth 3 hours at -50°C? Not the official theory, your actual working hypothesis. A data recorder? A communications relay node? A physical sample of something that had been sitting on the seabed for weeks? The range of answers that have appeared in classified reporting circles is wider than most people would expect. Leave your read in the comments. We read them. What strikes us about this moment in the story, two figures in orange suits working on Arctic ice at temperatures that should not be survivable for 3 hours, is what it says about the operational maturity of Russia's Arctic seabed program. The Western strategic conversation for the past decade has focused on Russian military buildup in the high north in terms of surface presence, more bases on Arctic islands, more ice-capable surface vessels, more Arctic amphibious capability. The underlying assumption has been that the competition is about who can put forces on the ice and in the air above it. The Belgorod sighting, the undetected transit, the unidentified second hull, the personnel on the ice, suggests that the most consequential part of the competition is not on the surface. It is below it. In a domain where surface forces and patrol aircraft are not the primary instrument, where persistence, not mobility, is the decisive capability. Russia appears to have deployed something that sits on the Arctic seabed and waits for months. That is not a test capability. That is an operational one. The physics of the polynya confirmed it. When the two figures had finished their work and returned to one of the submarines, and when both vessels eventually submerged, first the Belgorod, then the second hull independently, the two descents separated by 90 seconds, the polynya began to reclose. Norwegian oceanographers, when briefed on the observed refreeze rate in a restricted scientific consultation 5 months later, estimated a normal refreeze duration for a 400-meter polynya at that latitude, in those atmospheric conditions, of between 4 and 7 days. The actual measured refreeze time, confirmed by satellite imagery, was 31 hours, roughly 5 times faster than any natural process could produce. The oceanographers' initial response, documented in the consultation meeting minutes, was to suggest that the polynya had not formed naturally in the first place, that it had been artificially maintained, held open by a sustained subsurface heat source, and that when the heat source departed with the submarines, the refreeze proceeded at its natural rate, unconstrained by any continuing thermal input from below. The arithmetic from that conclusion was the piece of the story that nobody had been ready for. If the polynya had been artificially maintained since mid-September, which satellite imagery from the Norwegian Meteorological Institute's archive confirmed, showing open water at that position as far back as September 12th, then a heat-generating system had been operating continuously on the Arctic seabed at that location for 46 days before the Belgorod arrived. 46 days. Running, actively consuming power, generating enough thermal output to hold a 400-meter section of Arctic sea ice open through 6 weeks of October temperatures. Without detection by any monitoring system, satellite observation, or patrol aircraft grid. The Belgorod had not deployed a new system on October 28th. It had retrieved an old one that had been operating successfully for nearly 7 weeks before anyone found it. A program that successfully fields a seabed system for 46 undetected days is not a program that is still testing. It is a program that has already passed that stage. 3 days after the Norse 41 crew filed their reports, a set of orders arrived for the USS Hampton. The USS Hampton SSN-767 is a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine. She was commissioned in 1993, home-ported at Naval Submarine Base, New London in Groton, Connecticut. She carries 134 crew and a weapons load that includes Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and an anti-submarine warfare suite calibrated to find and hold contact against targets that do not want to be found. Los Angeles-class submarines are the foundational instrument of American undersea warfare, fast enough to shadow a Belgorod, quiet enough to do it without being detected in return. At the time the orders arrived, the Hampton was in preparation for a scheduled Mediterranean deployment. Exercise commitments in the Western Mediterranean basin. A standard peacetime assignment coordinated months in advance with Allied naval commands. The diversion order came through Submarine Forces Atlantic on October 31, 2024, 72 hours after the full sensor package from Norse 41 and Norse 43 had been processed and distributed. The Hampton's new operating area, the GIUK Gap, and the approaches north toward the Greenland Sea. A Los Angeles-class submarine diverting from a scheduled international commitment is not a minor logistics adjustment. It represents a decision at the level of theater command, a judgment that the capability gap created by pulling the Hampton from the Mediterranean is acceptable given the priority of what it is being sent to address. Someone assessed the Belgorod contact and what the Belgorod had retrieved as serious enough to make that calculation. The Hampton spent 63 days in the GIUK gap. She returned to New London on January 2, 2025. The results of her patrol have not been made public. What is known is that those results were included in a closed-door briefing provided to the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power in March of 2025. 11 senators attended. 7 of them issued public statements in the following 30 days calling for emergency supplemental investment in Arctic submarine operations. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, the committee's senior Republican, said publicly that the briefing had revealed, quote, an urgent capability gap that requires an emergency response. He did not elaborate on the nature of the gap. One senator described the briefing as among the most disturbing he had received in his time on the committee. He did not say why. Most people who follow Russian submarine operations assume that NATO has comprehensive acoustic coverage of the Arctic Sea approaches. The GIUK gap, the monitoring architecture between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, is the canonical example of Cold War anti-submarine surveillance infrastructure. Hydrophone networks, submarine patrol corridors, maritime patrol aircraft grids. The assumption embedded in most public discussion of Arctic security is that this infrastructure provides something close to full coverage, that nothing significant moves through those waters without generating a trackable signature. The Belgorod's undetected approach to 80 degrees north demonstrated that this assumption has not kept pace with what Russia has built. A vessel that manages its thermal output carefully transits at depth profiles that the legacy monitoring network was not designed to address, and benefits from acoustic modifications that defeat the specific frequency bands that Cold War-era arrays were calibrated for. Such a vessel can, apparently, reach the Greenland Sea without generating a single alert in any system that was running when it left Polynya Bay. The Arctic Sentinel program was the updated answer to that problem. 2 unmanned underwater gliders providing passive acoustic monitoring of the Greenland Sea, reporting continuously for 11 months before October 2024. Both gliders went dark in early October, within 36 hours of each other, from separate positions approximately 200 miles south of where the Belgorod surfaced. Neither has been recovered. Their loss was initially logged as simultaneous equipment failure. After the Belgorod sighting, the 36-hour window and the positions acquired different weight in the analysis. 2 autonomous systems, operating normally for 11 months, failing within 36 hours of each other in positions that placed them directly in the Belgorod's likely approach corridor in a period of otherwise normal sea conditions, is a coincidence that requires explanation. The explanation in the classified reporting was not equipment failure, which means the Hampton arrived in the GIUK gap with no acoustic baseline data from the preceding 11 months. No reference signature for the ambient noise environment of the Greenland Sea. No prior track data on what had moved through the area before the gliders stopped reporting. She was starting from zero. No environmental baseline. No acoustic fingerprint of the conditions that had prevailed during the 11 months the gliders had been the primary passive collection asset in the Greenland Sea. No record of what had transited through that section of ocean before they went silent. Finding an object that had operated on the Arctic seabed for 46 days without detection is not a problem that yields to standard anti-submarine search patterns. The Hampton would not have been looking for a vessel maneuvering at speed through the water column. She would have been looking for something sitting on the bottom, something with a minimal acoustic profile, something that had already demonstrated by its 46-day undetected deployment that it had been specifically optimized to be quiet in exactly the frequency ranges and at exactly the depths where the monitoring infrastructure looks for it. The depth in that section of the Greenland Sea runs to approximately 2,800 meters. The water at that depth is near minus 1.8 Celsius, just above the freezing point of seawater, at 280 atmospheres of pressure. The combination of extreme depth, near freezing temperature, and the acoustic noise environment generated by ice movement and pressure ridge formation above creates a search environment that is among the most challenging for passive acoustic detection. Put yourself in the Hampton's sonar team for a moment. You are looking for something that held open a 400-meter polynya for 6 weeks without anyone finding it. Something quiet enough that 2 Arctic Sentinel gliders, running for 11 months, recorded nothing that flagged it before they went dark. Something that moved 120 meters across the floor of a polynya in 47 minutes without leaving residual acoustic signature. You are looking for it with no baseline data, in the deepest, coldest, acoustically noisiest stretch of ocean in the North Atlantic. 63 days is a long time to be looking for something you cannot be certain is still there. Here is the position that will probably generate pushback. The institutional panic visible in the Senate's reaction to the Hamptons briefing is probably larger than the immediate operational threat warrants. And the reason it is larger than the threat is that seabed deterrence has a psychological effect on Western military institutions that is disproportionate to its current deployed capability. A Poseidon torpedo carried aboard the Belgorod can be tracked as long as the Belgorod itself can be tracked. A seabed-based system sitting on the floor of the Greenland Sea cannot be tracked by the same tools. That asymmetry, not the warhead yield, which is real but not categorically different from other Russian strategic systems, is what is producing the emergency language. The West does not have a seabed deterrent. It does not have a legal basis to prevent Russia from deploying one in international waters beyond any national continental shelf. It does not have a demonstrated capability, as of the March briefing, to locate and remove seabed nuclear assets it does not control. That combination is producing an institutional response that is partly driven by objective threat assessment and partly driven by the particular helplessness of not knowing where to point a countermeasure. Both things can be true at once. The detail in the Norwegian infrared footage that changed everything, the one that moved from Norse 43's sensor operator report to the most senior levels of the intelligence community faster than almost anything else collected, is a temperature reading. 4 degrees. When Norse 41's sensor operator first acquired the second smaller hull as it surfaced in the polynya, he recorded its hull surface temperature on the FLIR display relative to the adjacent Belgorod hull. The Belgorod was registering near ambient for a submarine that had been running deep in Arctic waters for hours or days. Her hull surface temperature was consistent with extended operation in near-freezing seawater. Cold metal. The second hull registered approximately 4 degrees warmer than the Belgorod. 4 degrees does not sound like much. In this context, it is the number that reframes the entire operation. A submarine hull operating at Arctic seabed depth at -1.8 Celsius at 280 atmospheres cools toward ambient temperature over time. It loses heat to the surrounding water. The rate depends on the vessel's insulation, its internal power generation, and the duration of the deployment. What it cannot do, under any realistic operational scenario, is emerge from Arctic depth and display a hull surface temperature 4 degrees above a vessel that has been at comparable depth for a comparable period, unless it was generating significantly more internal heat than the surrounding water could fully absorb, unless it had been running more power-intensive systems than a vessel that was simply maintaining station in cold water, unless it had been actively operating, consuming power, running systems, generating work output, for a period long enough to produce a net thermal elevation above Arctic ambient that persisted even after surfacing into near-freezing conditions at the surface. The analysts' conclusion from the thermal differential was precise. The second hull had been operating on the seabed, not in standby, not in low-power hibernation, operating, running systems that require continuous significant power draw, for a period consistent with the 46-day open polynya on the surface above it. The second hull had not been stored on the Arctic seabed. It had been working there. Understanding what working on the Arctic seabed for 46 days implies requires a step through the engineering constraints that nobody in the public discussion has fully articulated. The primary challenge of any seabed-deployed autonomous system is energy. You cannot run power cables from the surface in contested Arctic waters. Solar and wave energy sources are unavailable at depth. The only self-contained power source capable of running a vessel's onboard systems for 46 continuous days, generating enough heat to maintain a 400-meter polynya in October Arctic conditions, is nuclear. A nuclear-powered autonomous seabed vehicle. Self-contained, capable of 46-day continuous operation. Quiet enough to defeat both the Arctic Sentinel acoustic monitoring network and the existing GIUK gap infrastructure. Small enough to be transported docked under the Belgorod during a covert transit of the North Atlantic. This is what was briefed to the Senate subcommittee in March as the leading technical assessment. And if the assessment is correct, the second hull recovered in that polynya was not a prototype. Prototypes do not run for 46 operational days without human servicing. Prototypes do not maintain physical deployments in some of the most physically demanding environments on Earth without failure. Prototypes do not get retrieved by the world's most capable special mission submarine in an operation that required the Belgorod to make an undetected transit of the North Atlantic. A 46-day successful autonomous operation on the Arctic seabed is not a prototype result. It is a field deployment result. Here is the part of this story that does not sit right, even now, even after everything else in it. It is not the dramatic elements, not the figures on the ice, not the unidentified acoustic signature, not the polynya that should not have existed. It is the calendar. If the second hull was operational on the Arctic seabed from September 12, 2024, which is what the satellite imagery record supports, and if it was retrieved on October 28, 2024, then it ran for 46 days. But the Belgorod's arrival on October 28 may not have been the first scheduled retrieval. It may have been one retrieval in a series. The system may have been first deployed earlier in 2024. It may have been retrieved and redeployed more than once. The 46 days is the duration of one documented deployment cycle, not necessarily the total duration of the program. The question that nobody in the public record has answered, because nobody in the public record with access to the full classified picture is permitted to answer it, is how many of these systems exist and where the others are right now. We deliberately left out the section on what the Arctic Sentinel network was specifically designed to detect and what the timing of the glider's simultaneous failure tells you about how the second hull navigated to its seabed position without being logged. Comment more if you want that follow-on video. The open-source data on the Arctic Sentinel program's acoustic detection parameters is publicly available in ONR documentation. Mapping those parameters against the Hampton's 63-day patrol timeline produces a picture we have not put in this video because it deserves its own. The leading theory, as briefed to the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power in March 2025, can be stated simply, even if its implications are not simple. Russia has fielded an operational nuclear-powered autonomous seabed vehicle capable of sustained independent deployment in the Arctic Ocean. The K-329 Belgorod is the delivery and retrieval platform, the vessel that carries these systems to their deployment positions and collects them when their operational cycle is complete. The second hull, photographed in the polynya north of Scoresby Sound, was a unit of this class, completing a 46-day deployment. The two individuals in orange suits who spent 3 hours on the ice above it were conducting a physical interface operation, downloading data, replacing a component, or completing a task that required human contact and could not be accomplished remotely through the Belgorod systems. The weapon this system carries, if it carries what the Poseidon program implies, is not a delivery system in the conventional sense. A Poseidon fired from the Belgorod travels from the submarine to a target in a single mission. What the seabed system implies is different. An asset that deploys to a position, sits on the ocean floor at operational depth, and waits. For 46 days, for 6 months, for however long the mission architecture requires. Holding its payload in cold suspension at 2,800 meters until it receives a command. From a seabed position 340 miles north of Scoresby Sound, the Poseidon's stated operational range of 10,000 kilometers encompasses every major population center on the eastern seaboard of the United States. From a position in the Norwegian Sea, it covers Western Europe. From a position in the Pacific approaches, it covers the American West Coast. The difference between a Poseidon carried on the Belgorod and a Poseidon positioned on the seabed in international waters is the difference between a weapon that requires a visible delivery vehicle to get into position and a weapon that is already in position, that you cannot track to its launch point, that you cannot preempt by finding and following the submarine, that you cannot demand be removed because it sits in international waters beyond any national jurisdiction. This is the capability gap that Senator Wicker described as urgent in March. This is what the senators cannot discuss publicly, and this is why the USS Hampton spent 63 days in the GIUK gap. The Norwegian aircrew of Norse 41 and Norse 43 returned to Andøya and were placed immediately under classified reporting restrictions. Their after-action reports entered a channel that bypasses standard NATO information sharing protocols. 3 separate Freedom of Information requests, filed with the Norwegian Ministry of Defense in the first quarter of 2025, received identical responses. The requested information, if it exists, is exempt from release under provisions for information whose disclosure would harm national security interests. The USS Hampton returned to New London on January 2, 2025. Her crew observed standard post-patrol information security protocols. No crew member has spoken publicly about the 63-day deployment. The 2 Arctic Sentinel gliders remain on the Greenland sea floor. No replacement coverage has been deployed in their operating positions as of publicly available reporting. The Belgorod departed Olenja Bay again in late April 2025. Her current position, as of the most recent open-source tracking data, is not publicly known. The polynya north of Scoresby Sound is frozen over. Satellite imagery shows unbroken ice, white and featureless, stretching in every direction. If you looked at that patch of ocean today, you would see nothing unusual. White ice over 2,800 meters of black water. What is on the bottom of that water, what may still be there, or what has been moved, or what similar systems may be deployed in other waters right now, does not have a public answer. The senators who were briefed know what the Hampton found. They are not permitted to say. The Belgorod, when she returns to the Arctic this year, will not be detected until she wants to be, and the ice will grow back over everything she leaves behind. If this story is still running through your head, subscribe. The follow-on video covers the Arctic Sentinel program in detail. What those 2 gliders were specifically monitoring, what their acoustic detection parameters tell you about the second hull's approach, and what losing them means for coverage of the Greenland Sea right now. It is a different and in some ways more unsettling video than this one. Subscribe so you see it when it goes up. And if you think the West is responding correctly to seabed nuclear deterrence, or if you think the senators are understating the problem, leave your position in the comments. This is a debate that should be happening in public and mostly isn't. The ice does not care who wins the argument.